Welcome to Daraja Press Podcasts. On this episode, connection between Belfast and Palestine. Fra Hughes is a Belfast-born activist and author of Kidnapped on the Global Samud Flotilla to Gaza 2026. He grew up during the Troubles in 1960s and 1970s North Belfast, a world of armed British soldiers on the streets.
So I'd seen a mural in West Belfast and it showed you a Republican with a balaclava and it showed you a Palestinian with a keffiyeh, and they both had their hands up and in between their hands was an RPG and it said two armies, one struggle, or two causes, one fight. Because I've lived under occupation, I don't know if it prepared me for what we went through on the flotilla.
Feroz Maji continues his conversation with Fra Hughes, author of Kidnapped on the Global Samud Flotilla to Gaza 2026, published by Daraja Press.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Feroz Maji from Daraja Press. Welcome back to the Daraja Press podcast. Today, we're joined by Fra Hughes, a Belfast-born activist, humanitarian, and author of the newly released memoir, Kidnapped on the Global Samud Flotilla to Gaza 2026. I'm going to be talking to Fra about this book, but also about how he grew up in North Belfast during the Troubles, a childhood that shaped his understanding of occupation and resistance long before he ever set foot in Gaza or joined the flotilla. Let's just start with the beginning. I mean, you grew up in North Belfast during what people refer to as the Troubles. Can you paint a picture for our listeners to say, what was it like? And how did it shape, or did it shape, the man you became now?
Yeah, that phrase popped into my mind. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. A very unusual description for maybe how I kind of grew up. Yeah, I was born in Belfast in 1963, so the Troubles, as it's euphemistically described, would have begun when I was 6. So it's probably when I was 12 or 13, whatever years that would be in and around 1975, 1976. You're becoming a teenager. You're beginning to see the world through a teenager's eyes. You're beginning to question maybe your future, how things are going to turn out in life. I don't know, finding and establishing your position in your community, within your family, all kinds of things all come together at the same time. But yeah, 13, 14, we had armed British soldiers on our streets. We had rioting, there was bombings, there were loyalist counter-revolutionary gangs shooting people on the streets, kidnapping people. But, it becomes a part of everyday life. It just becomes part of routine. It's almost like what's happening in any society in the world, where there's conflict. It becomes part of your daily routine to see armed soldiers on the streets, to be stopped. Sectarian divisions within society between the pro-British kind of settler colonial rump that exists here in the north of Ireland. What I would probably describe as the indigenous kind of Catholic Irish cultural tradition that wants national reunification. So we had a divided society, which made it quite fractured. I mean, all the Catholics go to Catholic schools, all Protestants go to Protestant schools. We're all separated by our geography and our kind of housing social communities. I mean, I live in Belfast now, and we're nearly 30 years into the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and we still have something like 40 separation walls in Belfast. Not only has not one single wall come down for us, we've had like an extra 5 or 10. I mean, I'd need to Google it to get it to be absolutely correct on the details, but we have still a fractured society. So, the lack of violence does not denote peace. It just denotes a lack of violence. And there's still sectarianism, sectarian division, sectarian hatred. Mainly, I believe, from one community more so than the other community, if that makes sense. But no, it's not good. And I see ourselves as still being militarily occupied by the British 800 years after they first arrived in whatever that was, the 12th century.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right about being a teenager in Belfast, about the Shankill butchers, about being chased and nearly abducted. So, how did surviving that kind of violence prepare you for what you would later face on the flotilla?
Yeah, it's interesting to see kind of not my life, but my society through somebody else's eyes. I mean, we had here the divisions in society. You had the pro Irish community that were discriminated against because the state of Northern Ireland was artificially created through partition in Ireland in 1921. So we had a pro British kind of junta in charge for 50 years, the Ulster Unionist Party, and they discriminated against Catholics in housing. When I say Catholics, I mean the Irish people, in housing and education, jobs, every sector of society. And then we had what we consider to be the civil rights movement, 1969, similar and maybe enlightened and inspired by the American black civil rights movement, but our civil rights movement, like the one in America, was beaten off the streets. There was a pogrom in Belfast. We had 100,000 people move from one part of the city to another in 1969. It was the largest mass movement of civilian population since the Second World War. And obviously, you've had Bosnia, and you've had Yugoslavia, and you've had all these other things since that in Western Europe. So, yeah, the Sanko Butchers, these were people that were involved in what we call loyalist paramilitaries, people who are loyal to the British Crown. And what they did was they randomly picked up Roman Catholic Irish nationalists off the streets of North and West Belfast. And I think it's believed that they murdered 23 people. 19, they were convicted on 19 counts of murder. That's something like 906 years each. You can only serve a life sentence here, which was 25 years. But, this accumulative number of 25 for this murder and 25 for this murder and 25 for this murder and attempted murder and whatever. I got something like 906 years. Those people are all out. They were all released under the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. So they didn't even serve the 25 years in jail. Yeah, I was with a friend one night. We were sitting out on a wall outside a shop. Belfast in those days, people didn't go to the bars. People didn't go into the city centre to socialise. I mean, it was a ghost town, really in the darker evenings in the winter, 7, 8 o'clock at night, you'd suddenly realize, there's nobody about because people did go to work and people did go shopping. And it was almost like you could nearly pick Sarajevo or somewhere, during the day, people went to school, people went to work, people did what needed to be done. And in the evenings, people kind of hid in their houses. And we had what were called shebeens. So, they would take over a building and turn it into like a community kind of pub or bar. So people would stay in their own area and not have to travel outside late at night in the dark to have a beer. It's not about alcoholism, it's about socializing within the community. It's about people trying to relax and kind of survive what they were going through. So this car passed us, myself and a friend of mine, Pat, and they shouted what I believe was like up to UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force. And I was 14 or 15 or something. And I had what I call our standard uniform. I had like DM boots, I had a Wrangler jeans and a Wrangler jacket and a jumper, and I had a red and white bar clip involved my local football team club. That identified me as a Catholic in itself. The position of where I was on the road. We could only walk up to 3/4 of a mile in any direction before we went into this loyalist Protestant areas because Belfast is like a patchwork quilt. So there's a small area which would be nationalist beside a larger area which is loyalist, and that area would be beside an even larger area which is nationalist, which would be beside, a smaller area which is loyalist. So it's a real patchwork quilt. You could walk 3/4 of a mile, as I say, in any direction before it became dangerous. Anyway, I shouted like up the provost at these guys in the car, and I saw a car go straight on down the road. So I went out in the middle of the road and I looked down, even though it was dark, there hard no lights on, and I saw the brake lights come on. It didn't indicate like it was turning left or right. And I said, Pat, we better go here. They're coming back. Because when I saw the brake lights, I knew they were going to turn up the Eye Street and then come back in the loop towards us. We came down the side of the park. We turned right. So they'd gone down the road, turned right again. So as we come up the side of the park, they appeared on our left. And the park at that time had like 6 foot fence. And like I think I had 5 foot 8 or something, but like it was probably about 5 foot 6 back then. Anyway, we jumped over the fence, the two of us. I don't know how I did it. We were running in the park, and I looked over my shoulder to see if they were following us, and I saw the two silhouettes on the top of the fence, and my wee heart was beating like a sparrow, and I thought, Jesus Christ, coming into the park. Then somebody must have called them back, and we saw the shadows disappear. But we had in the park for at least half an hour in the bushes, and we were kind of thinking, are they waiting around the corner for us to come out? Are they going to come in the park? Because we're four different entrances to the park. Are they going to come in a different entrance and come up behind us in the dark? And eventually we just took the gamble of jumping over the fence and running what was literally like 2 minutes away all the way home. But there's a second story to that I'm going to tell you, that where I lived at the side of my house, there was an alleyway. So our street and the street behind us were parallel, and there was an alleyway that went down in between. And about 2 weeks later, one night at around 11 p.m., I heard someone banging on the back door of one of the houses, wooden back doors echoing in the entry in the dark at night. I was like, bang, 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 bang. And all I could hear was like, open the door, open the door. And I thought, Jesus Christ, what do you do? Now, it wasn't our house that they were banging on the door. And I thought, I wouldn't open the door because you don't know who's standing there. Is this a trick to get you to open your door and you're going to be shot? And it transpired that the man banging on the door was a neighbour of mine. He was about 18 or 19. He was banging on his own back door of Orient Gardens in the street parallel to mine. And the cycle butchers chased him down that street. He'd run all the way to his own back door, and his family didn't let him in because they didn't know who he was. And he ended up being murdered. So that's the type of, now that wasn't every day for Rose, you know what I mean? But they were on the loose for a long time, and they actually kidnapped people, and they hung them up on we took in and I think it was a club or a bar off the Shankill Road, trying to remember what street it was, and they tortured those people with knives. And eventually, the end of the story, right? They had murdered. I googled it. That's how I know it was 23. But I'd read and I had in my mind that they murdered 18 people, right? And then they just dumped the bodies in a local park walkway, and people would find the bodies and phone the police, and the police would turn up and they would take the body away. And I remember hearing they had found the 19th victim of the Shankill butchers. So what happened was the Shankill butchers had got their 19th victim, and they always finished their executions by slicing the throat. So you've got both your internal, external carotid arteries and stuff, and the windpipe. Their last victim must have been totally unconscious. And I believe instead of putting his head up, they did this. So it didn't actually sever everything in his throat. They dumped the body. That man survived. So when the police said they'd found the 19th victim of the Shankill butchers, everyone assumed, oh my God, that's just another dead captive. These thugs are still murdering people. But that man recovered in hospital. I put him in the car. They drove him up the Shankill Road. Apparently, a lot of people on the Shankill Road knew who these people were, and the police knew who they were, but the police apparently couldn't find evidence because everyone they murdered was obviously dead. This guy sat at the back of the car and went, him, 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 and they captured the Shankill butchers because he survived and he was able to be an eyewitness, and they were finally held to account. So that's one small story when you consider, I don't know, 3,500 people died, something like 47,000 people were injured. I lived in the murder mile. So to cut a long story short, because I've lived under occupation, I don't know if it prepared me for what we went through on the flotilla, or I just would like to think that I'm a realist and I knew the potential of what we were facing, because there were people on the flotilla who would say, like, we're going to Gaza, we're going to Gaza, we're going to Gaza. And in my mind, I'm thinking, we're not going to Gaza. We are going to be intercepted and we are going to jail, because the first person gets through on a maritime lifeline to Gaza, then the Israeli state is under huge pressure, because if one person get through, I think you'd have thousands on the following one trying to break the siege. And I don't think it was ever a reality that we would get through. But bearing in mind, the idea was to challenge the siege. The idea was to show the world what was happening in Gaza. And the idea was to tell the Palestinians they weren't alone and that governments might fail, but civil society, where necessary, would step in.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you may not have succeeded in breaking the siege, but what you did manage to bring, I think, is hope, and they can never destroy that. So I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. So give me an idea of, what was your first exposure to Palestine? I mean, when did you start making the connection between Belfast and Palestine?
Yeah, well, it was 1982. So in 1981, here in the north of Ireland, we had the hunger strikes. So Margaret Thatcher, I think, was elected into power around 1979. So what had happened was when a conflict started here, people were arrested. People were also interned without trial, which is the same as administrative detention in the Israeli state, which follows on from the British mandate from the 1920s in Palestine. So Margaret Thatcher was trying to criminalise the Republican struggle here. She said, these are not national liberation fighters. These are not freedom fighters. We are not occupying the north of Ireland. These are criminals. These are terrorists using violence for political ends. The only people I see using violence for political ends are the Zionists and Western hegemonic powers. So we had 10 people die in hunger strike, including Bobby Sands. Bobby Sands was elected as a member of Parliament for Fermanagh South Tyrone while he was on hunger strike. So an Irish Republican prisoner on hunger strike in a British jail on Irish soil got more votes than the Prime Minister of the country in a by-election. And he died on the 31st of May, 1981. So I'd seen a mural in West Belfast. So that would have been my first steps into activism because I would have been 17 stroke 18 in 1981. I remember seeing a mural, which is where they paint the walls. So, I could see something happen on the streets in Belfast for Rose, and I could put on the 6 o'clock news and I could go, that's not what happened. I saw with my very own eyes, but the reporter is giving a different, propaganda interpretation of the facts on the ground. So people used to put things on the wall, like not an ounce, not a bullet, smash Storm out, which was the Northern Ireland Parliament, Brits out, victory to the IRA, victory to the POWs, the prisoners of war. So we had the hunger strikes, and then I remember seeing this mural, and it showed you a Republican with a balaclava, and it showed you a Palestinian with a keffiyeh, and they both had their hands up, and in between their hands was a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG, and it said something like, two armies, one struggle, or two causes, one fight, something along those lines. But it was in 1982, Shabra Shatia, watching television like everybody else, saw the PLO being forced out of Beirut, saw some coverage on the massacres in Shabra and Shatia by the butcher of Beirut, Ariel Sharon, and the Christian Phalange. And it just struck me, why the PLO in Beirut? Why are they fighting the Israelis in Beirut? Why are they not fighting in Palestine? Naivety, lack of education, lack of knowledge as to what had happened in Palestine in 1948. But my awakening as such was in 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead, where they murdered so many men, women, and especially children over the period of December to January. I think it was over like 14 days. And then you had the Mavi Mamara. So there's a red line for a lot of people. I've met so many people. I'm so grateful in a way for what they do from October 2023, from the start of what we consider to be a genocide and ethnic cleansing of the people in Gaza and the West Bank, the famine, the starvation, the lack of medicine, the lack of fuel, the lack of water, bombing people in their homes and bombing in their tents, then shooting them as refugees as they move from place to place. But mine started in 2010, and with the murder of the people on the Mavi Mamara and shooting Furka Dogan, a 19-year-old. He was dual national American Turkish, and he wanted to cure blindness in Africa. And that is the type of person who was on the Mavi Mamara that they intercepted in international waters and then murdered 9 people on the boat. One subsequently died later, and I think the answer is like 47 people. So, like, holy God, what threat do unarmed people present to like the fourth largest army in the world at that time? It's criminal, it's immoral, it's barbaric, and it needs to end. So that's really Operation Cast led, and then the attack on the Mavi Marmara led me to start our own Palestine support group called Belfast Friends of Palestine. And then we ended up getting a 13-seater wheelchair accessible minibus, which we took with George Galloway and Viva Palestina 5 medical aid convoy to Gaza in 2010. We were in Gaza for 3 days, and we donated the minibus to the Al Auda hospital in Gaza. I'm not sure that still exists now today.
You're listening to the Daraja Press podcast. Daraja is the Kiswahili word for bridge. As its name suggests, Daraja Press seeks to build bridges, especially bridges of solidarity between and amongst movements, intellectuals, and those engaged in struggles for a just world. Check out our other episodes, books, and more at darajapress.com. So now let's get back to the show. I mean, what made you go to Gaza? What was your plan? I mean, you're this group of strangers who just got together, got in this van, and off you go to Gaza.
Yeah, it's a bit surreal when you think about it. Well, as I say, we started this group, Belfast Friends of Palestine. It started off as an independent group, and then we had what I will call some local political people. Someone joined our group, and they were connected to the local political party, which I was unaware of at the time. And that drew us into like a spider's web where people appeared to be supporting us, but actually, I think, wanted to control the group. So they helped do some fundraisers. We raised the money, and we were sending money directly to the Al Auda hospital because it had the James Connolly surgical unit, which was being paid for by, I believe, Medical Aid for Palestine. So we did a fundraiser. Well, the money would go to Medical Aid for Palestine, and that would help kit out and furbish this newly built theatre surgical suite in this hospital in Gaza. And I had spent 15 years as an anaesthetic technician in the Ulster Hospital in Dundonald. So, it's interesting that the tracks and the parallels there. So we met someone through the fundraiser who was called Dr. Saib Shaf, who was the Palestinian representative to Ireland. And we became friends. And he said to me, Fra, it's fantastic raising money, but if you really want to see what's happening to people in Palestine, if you really want to help, you should go. And I remember thinking, there's not a snowball's chance in hell of me going to Gaza because they're bombing it. And, I have a business. I've got a partner. I don't mean I have things to lose. I have things to do, but like some things in life that put the seed in my mind. I think it was less than 3 or 4 months later that I was on that convoy going to Gaza. I went because I believe what he said to me. I believe that real solidarity is standing shoulder to shoulder and toe to toe with the people who are being oppressed, with the people who need that help. And I'll give you one example. We got to Gaza and we were talking to people who spoke English in Gaza, ordinary guys and girls. And one of them said to me, if you'd arrived here in your bare feet without a shirt on your back, that's all we would have wanted. That people have come, that we're not alone, that people care, and that you'll be an ambassador for us when you go home to tell people what's happened. So that was 2010. So I've been on 2 land convoys. I've been on 2 flotillas. I was on the Global March to Gaza last year. I've been in the Syrian Arab Republic 5 times. I've been in Lebanon 4 times. I'm just back from Karbala in Iraq, and I've just bombed all those people over the last 24 to 48 hours. And I've been twice to Venezuela, and I've been to South Africa, and I've also been to the Donbass 3 times. And I just want to throw that in because I believe that CIA coup in 2014, when Victoria Nuland said, it cost us $5 billion to bring democracy to Ukraine. So they had democracy. What they had was a racist, fascist, nationalistic coup. And then the people in eastern Ukraine, I have a very close friend called Andre. As I say, I visited 3 times. I was an election monitor, I think, in 2018. And I remember him saying to me, we never left the Ukraine. The Ukraine left us. So he's Russian speaking, Russian Orthodox, born in Eastern Ukraine. I think his father was part of the Russian military at some point, but he saw himself as Ukrainian. but he was a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. And then they had the coup, and then they had a form of military occupation of their own country in eastern Donbass, where these neo-Nazis were determined to remove any vestige of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox language. These people had to fight to save themselves in order to defend themselves. So that's why I went to the Donbass. I went because I met Andre in 2015, I think, in Damascus at the World Federation Trade Union Congress, where I'd been invited.
Yeah,
So
but I'm very glad that you mentioned this Donbass, because just a few days ago, of course, Zelensky bombs an Iranian vessel, yeah? And I've always seen those two struggles as just different faces of the same coin, And so that's great that you've mentioned it. Let's move on. You founded Palestine Aid in Ireland, yeah, which is sort of entirely volunteer led. So, what keeps you motivated?
yeah, thank you very much. That's a very important question for me because it's very dear to my heart. It's the same kind of philosophy. So, first of all, you go to the rallies and you wave your flags and you say, not in my name, and the murder campaign, bring a ceasefire, whatever it was in 2010. Then you end up going on a land convoy for 35 days it took us. And then you come back and you go, well, what else can I do? So we started the charity. And the first thing we did was we raised £10,000 for the Alamal orphanage in Gaza City, because one of the guys so we had 3 English interpreters who met this international delegation when we were in Gaza. And one of them, his name was Musa. So I contacted Musa and I said, Musa, look, we're back home. We're going to try and raise some money. We know you work in the orphanage and we know there's problems with the fuel. So this is really the only, there were a couple of times that we would have done this where we directed where the money went. Okay. So initially I sat down with the guys and we thought, let's get them solar panels so they'll always have electricity in the orphanage. They're not worried about the fuel shortages that are caused by the Israeli administration. So we got them solar panels, and that was say 2011. And then we were thinking education's so important, and there's gifted people in Gaza who don't have the money to pay for their education. So we contacted the Islamic University in Gaza and we said, look, how much would it be for a scholarship for 1 year? We want to pay the educational fees associated with a 3-year university degree course. So the first one was for a guy called Amjad, and that was in law. So we thought maybe he become a lawyer and they used the law against the occupation. Then the second one was in midwifery. And then the third one was in child psychology, because we thought, the kids are traumatized. So we'll try and give someone the skills. So that was like 12, 13, 14. And then we had a bit of a hiatus because it's difficult to keep fundraising. And we were going, an ever decreasing circle of people. There's only a couple of us. We were all volunteers. But then we were able to restart the charity, because what happened was, I think it was in and around 2016, whenever one of the wars were, we still had some money. We'd raised about £1,800, not enough for a scholarship, and we didn't know what to do with the money, so it kind of sat dormant in the bank. And then whenever there was another war, it just started niggling me in my mind, that money's sitting in the bank. People didn't give us the money to sit in the bank. Let's see if we can do something with it. So whenever October 7 kicked off and we're watching it, everything's closed, nothing's getting in, there's a complete lockdown in Gaza. I remember thinking, right, that's it. We can't, we never ever sent anything over to Gaza other than money, because the money goes direct into the local economy. So our guys would go to a shop, they're looking for 100 winter coats for children. So then we started getting winter coats and winter shoes. But I remember thinking, there's nothing we could do, can't get anything in. What happened is we have this charitable vehicle. And then whenever October 2023 started, and people were looking, we want to do something, we want to help. We had the vehicle to help people who wanted to help, if that makes sense. So those 320,000 meals, we sent over $10,000 at a time, right? and it goes to a wholesalers. So they'll have like 50,000, liters of oil, maybe not as much as that, maybe 1,000 liters of oil or whatever. But we send it over. So we get like a liter of oil, a packet of sugar, tea bags. It's always canned food because there's nothing fresh. And they would have pasta and I would have chickpeas and whatever. We claim to have sourced on the ground 320,000 meals in Gaza. It's cost somewhere in and around $180,000, €160,000, £140,000. So we have money in the bank at the moment. So that's what we intend to do over the next few days, is send another 10,000 to get another 12,000 meals. Now, price of food fluctuates. It depends what's available on the ground. Sometimes it's 120 families, sometimes it's 160. And people now, there's Mother Against Genocide. They're raising money here in the north of Ireland, all over Ireland, for water tanks. So they have water tanks going in. There's Gaza Aid, a friend of mine, Helena. She was trying to supply tents, very dear. We started off with the food, and not too long ago, we were able to buy cleaning products for the tents, toothbrushes, toothpaste, bleach, dishcloths for cleaning dishes, towels, things like that there. So at the very start, we were directing the money. First, it was for the solar panels, then it was for the scholarships. But from the genocide started, we simply say, we're going to send over 10,000. Where do you want it sent to? What are you going to do with it? And please send us some photographs and some testimonials. So people can follow us, Palestine Aid Ireland, on Facebook, and we have a donation link. But we're a registered charity. We have no offices. We have no paid fundraisers. We have no overheads. And we guarantee that everything that's given to the charity goes to Gaza.
Let's talk about the flotilla. Why did you decide to join, knowing the risks? What were you hoping to achieve?
I was on the Global March to Gaza, which was in June. And that's when 3,000 people from all over the globe descended on Cairo. And we were meant to go from Cairo by buses down through Al Arish up to the Rafah border crossing, and then stand outside the wall at Rafah at the border crossing and demand it be opened. Now, we only got as far as the second checkpoint in Ismailia on our way to Rafah, because people were being followed in Cairo, people were being deported at the airport. I mean, I knew in the two convoys, we ended up sitting in Latakia for 15 days in the first convoy, while negotiations between the leaders of the convoy and the Egyptian security services were underway to facilitate our arrival. So many people were beaten in Ismailia, and that's where I first met Mandela Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela. He was such an iconic leader from an iconic family, and you can't not see him. He's about 6'4". I met him briefly. Now, they beat people back onto the buses and stuff. So that got me involved with the Global March to Gaza ERA, which is the organising committee. So what happened was, when we were in Cairo, and I got to meet the people who were in charge, following on from, you went to Cairo, we know who you are, you're a known asset, and they've heard the story that you've heard in conversation about doing stuff with the charity and being in Gaza and stuff. There's an application and a vetting process, and at the end of that, I don't know, 10% of the people who applied get to go. So that's basically what happened. I heard that there was a flotilla going. I thought about, I think at that stage last year, that already bombed the conscience of Crete. The people were on the boat and they fired a rocket or something from a drone into the boat to disable the engine. So you knew you were going to be in danger, but I'm not a great social interaction person. I'm quite a quiet, reserved, keep myself to myself kind of person. I struggle being in company. I could speak to anyone like this in a one-to-one. I could talk to people all day, but in group dynamics, I don't feel very comfortable and confident. So I'll throw that out there. But if I focus on all of that, I wouldn't have gone. I just thought, look, what's the right thing to do? And I thought, well, you've got the charity that you're involved in. You've been in two land convoys before. There's a genocide taking place. The people in Gaza ask, where's humanity and where's the world? And I was interviewed on the flotilla, and I was asked the same question, why did it go? And my answer was, to tell the Palestinians, we see you, we hear you, we are coming. So it's that simple, humanity to humanity. You're not alone. We will try whatever we can and we will endeavor to reach you in solidarity. So I went because I just thought it's the right thing to do. And you cannot say that you support the people of Palestine and you're given the opportunity to physically show that support and then go, you know what, I'm not doing that.
No. Yeah. So, but I mean, God, you spent 28 days or so sailing on the good ship Alma before the interception. I mean, tell us something about what was it like being on the sea? And you were with lots of other activists who are also quite well known. Greta Thunberg, Mandela, you mentioned, Tada Hickey. How did you bond? How did you all work together in a situation where you say, you're not easy in large crowds? Give us an idea of what went on and how did you all bond?
I was on the Alma 28 days, but I was away in total 42 days between the non-violent training in Barcelona and returning on the 7th of October of all dates back to Belfast in 2025. Being on the boat was great, believe it or not. Initially, when you're out on the boat and everyone's starting to gel and we're having night watches. So when you're on a night watch, it's like a one-to-one that we're talking about here. So you get to meet the people and you get to chat and you get to, I don't know, explore each other's kind of personalities. I didn't have any issues on the boat. One or two people wouldn't have been my cup of tea, and there was a bit of drama, and I just thought, I'm not getting involved in that. I mean, you can make it worse by having an opinion on someone else's opinion of someone else. So I just stayed. I stayed away from any gossip and any drama, but there wasn't much to stay away from. And I think everyone had a very similar mindset. We're comrades. We're in this together. I tell you one thing that I've noticed all the way through my activism, and I noticed it in Iraq. I'm just back from Karbala, and I noticed it when I was at the Musalla for Ayatollah Said Ali Khamenei, and when I was in Mashhad. When I meet people of a similar philosophical outlook, I don't seem to have any problem with them. I could sit and be myself. I could sit and talk politics. We can engage in conversation. Yet I can walk around the corner to the bar or the cafe and sit beside a complete stranger who I've never met in my life and not be able to have a conversation with them because we have nothing in common. So maybe it's the commonality. Maybe we're all coming from either the same place on the left or we're coming from a religious conservatism, but also has anti-oppression at the core of its dogma. And that's where we're meeting. Anti-oppression for me is anti-imperialism. It's anti-colonialism. It's anti-capitalism. So I'll call it a meeting of minds. So I never really had any bother with anybody. And then we had two of our boats, including the Alma Firebond, when we were in Sidi Bouzid in Tunisia. And then when we sailed the Crete, we had 11 ships attacked one evening between midnight and 3 a.m. So the Alma was a motorboat. So we had what was called a poop deck at the back. So if you think of a motorboat as opposed to a sailing ship, it's like a pleasure boat. It was maybe the best way to describe it. And at the back, there would be a table and a space for people to stand. And I looked out this particular night, and in the background, you had this cacophony of stars in the background. And then we could see the ships here, 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 almost like in a semicircle around our boat. And they had their what's called the steaming mast or the sailing light on the mast. So the bigger the ship, the bigger the number or the higher up the light would be on the mast. And I remember looking at them thinking, my God, what a beautiful sight. That's all our people out there. And I remember thinking it was a bit emotional because you're sailing on your boat and you don't really see the other ships. They're not constantly in and around you. And at night in the dark, you're sailing on your own. And then all of a sudden, to have the ships come together, because last year, I think it was something like 44 boats in total, but they attacked 11 of them off the island of Crete. 10 were attacked with some form of explosive device. So you would see a flash in the night sky, and then you'd hear the explosion. And like I'm standing on the back, I had my arms folded, I'm standing on the back of the boat watching what's happening. And you have the stars, and you have the boats, and you have the moon, And just whatever way this picture was framed from the back of our rectangular boat, I thought, this looks like a cinema. I could nearly be sitting down in the cinema eating popcorn, watching this surreal events play themselves out in front of my very eyes. But they attacked 11 ships, and one of them was attacked with, we think it was hydrogen sulfate, which is like a chemical attack. So it's like CS gas or CR gas or mustard gas or something from back in the day, because it's an asphyxiant and you could choke and you could die. So the firebombed two of the large boats, including the Alma. They attacked 11 of the other boats in open waters. And then the family boat, which had the steering committee, that's Tiago Avila and others, it broke down. And on our boat, we had Greta Thunberg, and we had Mandela, and we had Tag Hickey, a good friend of mine. We also had Polish MP Frank. We had, I think, a French MEP, and we had some other social media influencers, including Leila and Idris and Yara and Cosimo and Kuba. So anyway, what a really good mix of different people on our boat. So when the family boat broke down, Tiago Avila came on to our boat and he said, guys, our boat's broken down. We're the steering committee. We need 7, 8 volunteers to leave this boat to go on other boats to complete the mission, because the steering committee has to stay together. So I remember looking down at the ground and I thought, I don't want to go. And I thought, I don't think anybody wants to go. Spent 28 days putting a lot of emotion and a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to fit in with everybody, trying to find a niche within the group dynamics where you felt comfortable with everybody. The last thing you wanted to do was leave your new family and comfort zone to take a big deep breath. Right, here we go, and then go on to another boat and maybe go through that process again. And then I thought, what's the right thing to do? And then I thought, well, the Alma's not my boat. And if it wasn't for the steering committee, I wouldn't be here. And if they have to stay together in order to promote the next phase, which would be the interception phase of the flotilla, I thought the right thing to do was to put my hand up. It was then decided that I would go on the Thai Jetty, which was a sailing boat. So I got my head around it. I'd be leaving the next morning. So as I got on the boat, the starter motor on the boat I was on was broken. And the captain said to me, I don't know why the fuck you're on this boat. It's broken down. So I ended up in Crete. For 8 days while we were trying to repair the boat. And 4 days after we arrived in Crete, they intercepted the Alma. But then there was the 1,000 Madeleines and the Freedom Flotilla Coalition who were sailing behind the Global Salute Flotilla, and we were trying to fix the boat to get out to meet them, and in the end it just didn't happen. And after 8 days I got a message saying, thank you for continuing the mission. This boat will now be in the next flotilla. It's time to go home. That was the journey in 2025.
Well, Franz, it's a real privilege to have had you on this podcast, and even a greater privilege to have published your book. I'm really enormously impressed by all that you have done. Fra, thank you for this interview.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
That was part 2 of Feroz Manji speaking with Fra Hughes, the author of Kidnapped on the Global Summit Flotilla de Gaza 2026. It is available from Daraja Press at darajapress.com. Produced by Pierre Loisel and Feroz Manji. Music by Arlo Maverick. Thanks for listening.